I remember walking home from school one afternoon as a little boy, aware of a looming confrontation between the United States and Soviet Union over the placement of nuclear missiles on the island of Cuba. President John Kennedy and his inner circle had pondered America's response to the Soviets' intent and decided to meet the challenge with a military blockade in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Cuba. Why do I remember this particular experience as a 10-year-old boy? Because of how I felt. To this day, I remember the anxiety and even dread deep in my gut. Of course, the crisis passed after several anxious days, but what did not change was the realization that fear and anxiety are part of the experience of life. We're now living in a disruptive period in which so many are experiencing fear and anxiety. For so many of us, it has to do with COVID-19, concerns about health or that of a loved one, losing a job, online schooling, or the long-term economic consequences of the pandemic. Others are experiencing heightened anxiety about our current political climate and election, and people are anxious about policing and protests and riots. Some are worried about wildfires and hurricanes and even the long-term implications of climate change. It is important to know that these circumstances will change. They may have already changed by the time you view this. Things are going to get better, more predictable and stable in the future. We have come a long way as human beings on this planet. And if we take a big step back, life is better for most of humanity than at any other time in human history. However, what will not change is fear. We will continue to experience fear. It's a common human emotion. The question is how we deal with our fear. Too often we wait for it to be over and think that we'll then get back to living a normal life. But better is to see fear as an opportunity and use it to empower ourselves and become stronger at life. So in the rest of this video, what I would like to do is present 4 ways of handling fear, 3 of which are quite common and yet not healthy. Then I'll talk about how to face fear in a way that is healthy and empowering. Fear is a heightened emotional and physiological response to a circumstance which is perceived as dangerous. During fear, whether real and imminent or perceived and distant, the body produces a rush of chemicals and hormones which prepare it to deal with the threat. I want to suggest that there are 3 unhealthy ways of dealing with fear. First is to fight. The physiological arousal causes some people to become frustrated and angry. They become reactive and irritable and even controlling or over-controlling. They channel their fear into blame and lashing out at others, not paying attention to the more vulnerable feelings going on inside of them. A second response is to flee. This is to retreat into oneself. Rather than lashing out, this person wants to withdraw from life, curl up into a ball and hide under the covers, so to speak. They feel the fear, but also feel incapable of dealing with it, and so become passive and want to hide emotionally. At its extreme, these people become immobilized. They obsess so much about the fear that they shut down emotionally. They feel heavy and depressed and avoid anything that might heighten their anxiety. The third response, unhealthy response, I should say, is to ignore it. These people act like it's not there or it's not real. They avoid it by distracting themselves through technology or other habitual behaviors. Or they avoid it by not paying attention or really even thinking about it. Well, although we have a preferred response, many of us will vacillate between all 3 of these ways of handling fear, depending upon the ups and downs of our emotions and what's going on at the time. The problem, however, is that these are coping methods. None of them deals directly with the underlying feeling of fear. The best way to deal with fear is to process it. By this, I'm talking about facing it squarely, feeling it, and then acting on it in a way that allows you to retain or regain your equilibrium and sense of power over your life. Below are the steps to do this. Step number 1 is to be aware. Dealing with fear begins with awareness. You can't transform something if you're unconscious or unwilling to admit what's going on or what's going on inside of you. You have to admit to yourself that you're afraid or anxious. This admission keeps you whole and centered. It opens the gate to deal with it in a more healthy way. Step number 2, experience it. This means that you let it be rather than running or distracting or converting it into another emotion. You allow it, knowing that it's nothing more than a feeling or a chemical reaction in your body. Experiencing doesn't mean you're in imminent danger. It simply means you're human. You can do this by taking a short pause in which you ask yourself what you're feeling at the moment. Then quiet your mind and look inward. What physical sensations do you notice inside your body? What feelings do you notice? Rather than being caught up in the emotion, you're being a witness to the feelings. The idea is to give your feelings some space, not to try to get rid of them. Relax into them, allow them to be, knowing that it's okay to feel anxiety or fear. You want to do this with compassion rather than judgment. You don't criticize or condemn yourself for what you feel, but simply allow it. Where in your body do you feel it? What does it feel like? Come from a place of curiosity rather than judgment. You're being a witness of your experience rather than acting it out through fighting or fleeing or avoiding. If it's really big, I sometimes deepen this process. I'll actually lie down on a bed and then begin by noticing first my breathing. Then after a couple minutes, I pay attention to any of the physical sensations, starting with my head down to my toes. Then I pay attention to the feelings, allowing them to be, just noticing. Well, the incredible thing about doing this is that as you do these first few steps, you'll find that your fear begins to diminish by about half, generally. It simply won't be as big as it was before you allowed yourself to be aware and experience it. Let me move on to step 3. Look at your thoughts. Your fear is not created by an event or circumstance, but by your thinking. For example, a tree doesn't fear a wildfire because it doesn't have a brain. I can't attach meaning to the event. Because it doesn't have a brain. That's a joke. It can't attach any meaning to the event. It simply flows with Mother Nature. You feel fear because of your thoughts, the way you're talking to yourself about the event. So once you've given yourself a little bit of time to face and feel the fear, then you want to examine the thoughts that you're generating about this feeling. Ask yourself, what am I thinking? What am I telling myself about this circumstance, what this event means? Allow these thoughts to come to you. Don't dismiss them. In fact, I recommend that you write down maybe the top 3 or 4 on a sheet of paper. I wouldn't survive if I were to get COVID, or I'm worried for my loved ones, or I'm afraid of losing my job. And then be willing to challenge your thoughts. If you step back from your thoughts and really examine them, you'll find that they contain distortions of logic. They're not 100% true. You have to be able to see that there's a difference between what is, reality, and your thoughts about what is. They are not one and the same. You begin to realize that as you examine them, that there are distortions in them. One of those distortions is fortune telling. In other words, I tell myself that what's going to happen in the future without really knowing. Another distortion is all or nothing thinking. See that something's either one way or another. There's no middle ground. Another distortion is a mental filter. I dwell on a negative aspect of a circumstance rather than looking at the whole picture. Another distortion is catastrophizing or only seeing the worst case scenario. Another distortion is emotional reasoning. I feel something and therefore it must be true. Another is overgeneralizing or labeling. Don't simply let your thoughts run wild, but step back and look at them. Challenge them to make sure that they're objective and grounded in reality. And then change the thoughts to other thoughts that are more objective or realistic. This isn't simply trying to be positive. You're not just trying to psych yourself up. Your new thoughts have to be believable and empowering. You don't do this to get rid of the fear, but rather to understand it, how your own brain is contributing to it, making it something bigger or worse than it is. Step 4 is to practice calming yourself. Find strategies to cultivate peace and calm. The more you can calm yourself, the better you'll feel, the more effectively you'll be able to deal with the circumstances of your life. One strategy is to pause and focus on your breathing for 4 or 5 minutes. Another is to practice present-centered mindfulness. Another is to do some yogic stretches or practice a few minutes of meditation. Even go on a nice walk or listen to some calming music. These strategies aren't meant to fully replace your fear, but you can experience peace and calm in the midst of fear. They can coexist. Most of these strategies ground you in the present moment. As you focus on the present, you can send yourself more calming messages that sound like, I'm safe in this moment. I can handle what's happening right now. I'm okay right now because. I'm going to be okay in the future because. Or I'm strong and capable. Find messages that will work for you. Messages that will help you find peace and calm and act from your strength and power rather than fear. Step 5. Take action. Finally, it's good to get into some kind of action. It can be big action or little action. It can be directly related to the source of your fear or, if not possible, an action that helps you move forward in life. Taking action helps you recognize that you're not powerless. It gives you relief from your fear and helps you feel productive. You can be useful rather than just be afraid. Think of it this way. All emotion, including fear, is energy. By taking action, you focus and direct your energy in ways that are positive and productive, rather than letting it eat at you. You turn your fear into motion by creating solutions and making a contribution rather than simply obsessing about what's going on. Notice that when you're focused on fear, you're resisting life. You're focused on what you don't want. Action allows you to begin to focus on what you do want. Instead of thinking about what makes you afraid and resisting, you focus on positive vision. Rather than thinking about the fear, what you don't want, let the fear cause you to clarify what you do want. What is making you afraid? What do you want instead? Turn the fear around so that it becomes a motivator to make something more important happen. One form of action is service. To reach out to other people, people who have fewer resources than you. There's little that's more satisfying than becoming immersed in somebody else's life and knowing that your actions make a difference to them. Well, none of what I've shared with you gets entirely rid of the fear necessarily. Fear will always be a part of the human experience, your experience. But these steps will help you deal with it so it doesn't overwhelm you or become the primary theme of your life. People throughout history have dealt with fear, including your very own ancestors. Big fear, by the way. So rather than waiting for circumstances to change, would you be willing to dig deep and act now to evolve and create a better life for yourself and the people around you? If you are committed, you can become good at handling fear. You can find the strength and the resourcefulness, the other qualities inside of yourself that are bigger than your fear. Of course, you got to want it. Taking the steps that I have been mentioning won't be easy, but I do think it will be worth it.